The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, unless you're on the West Coast, and then good late morning to you. My name's Tim Sarantonio. I'm Director of Business Development here at Neon CRM. Want to welcome you to today's webinar, The Data-Driven Nonprofit, Why It Matters and How You Get There. We're excited to share a lot of great research, a lot of great tools that you'll be able to leverage in your own work. Before we get started, and as people file into today's presentation as well, I'm going to go over a few housekeeping items. The first item is that we are recording today's webinar. So if you have to leave early, though this should be pretty tight and focused, but if for some reason something comes up, daycare calls, you forgot something for dinner that you got to go run out and get it, cool, go for it. We're going to record it. You can come back to it, and we're excited for you to learn from what we're going to go over here in any way that you want to do it. Housekeeping item number 2 is that we have some handouts that you'll be able to download. That includes today's slides, as well as some supporting information about our company's offering, as well as some definitions on some of the terms that we're going to be going into today. So definitely check those out, download those 3 handouts, and make use of them, because there's some really good stuff in there that we're going to be going into in a live format. So today we're going to be talking about a few different things. We're going to dive in first with our agenda. So data can always be something that is talked about but not necessarily understood. And so what we want to do is just start with the basics. So we're going to start by defining and understanding why key performance indicators, what are those, and why does it actually matter? So actually drilling down and understanding the elements of fundraising strategy as it relates to benchmarks and key performance indicators, or KPIs for short. We're going to talk about leveraging the fundraising effectiveness KPIs within your own fundraising strategy. There's 14 of these that we're going to highlight today, give a nice overview on. And so we want to talk about how that actually relates to your day-to-day work, and then using that into your management of your strategy. Ultimately, none of this needs to be just theory. None of this just needs to be a bunch of numbers that you're provided and told, oh, well, this is what you need to pay attention to. We need this to help you raise more money, to save time, to build capacity. And so we're going to give you some action items, and of course, I'm going to be available here to answer questions. Now, who am I? Why am I doing this webinar? Why am I somebody who you should listen to, if we're going to be honest? Well, my name's Tim Sarantonio, Director of Business Development, been with Neon coming up to 7 years. But before that, I worked for nonprofits. I continue to also work with nonprofits. I've raised over $3 million. I've used a lot of different databases and learned how to fold these KPIs, key performance indicators, into my everyday work when I was using things like Razor's Edge, Salesforce, and I actually do use Neon CRM as my current database for an all-volunteer nonprofit. So that's something that's important, because 85% of Neon's staff actually has a similar background to me. So when we built out features that we're going to see a little bit today on, we did that because we've been there. And that's a really, really important differential that we want you to take away today, is that Neon knows where you've been and where you should be going. And so when we design things, it's because we need it to help you. And we don't just do it in a vacuum. So a lot of this that we're going to see today is because of an amazing project that you might not have heard about. So I'm going to give a key shout out to a project called the Fundraising Effectiveness Project. The Association of Fundraising Professionals, or AFP for short, and the Center of Nonprofits and Philanthropy at the Urban Institute established the Fundraising Effectiveness Project to conduct research on fundraising effectiveness and help nonprofit organizations increase their fundraising results at a faster pace. Now, our company, Neon CRM, is proud to directly contribute directly to this research as part of the Donor Software Advisory Committee. And many of the underlying theories in this presentation come from these collective efforts. This is an industry-wide benchmark. Doesn't matter if you live in the US, if you live in Canada, Australia, doesn't matter. These are things that are going to apply to your organization because there's been massive amounts of time and effort to understand what makes nonprofit donors tick. And then we want to put that data, that actionable information in your hands. So first, we have to start with understanding KPIs in the first place, key performance indicators. So what exactly is a KPI? Well, first, it's really just kind of the understanding of just tracking benchmark information. And so being able to roll up to a larger goal and just understand what matters most along the way so you can adapt. That's really at its core, it's something to pay attention to. So in this example here, if you're trying to achieve $10,000 in donations, that we would term your goal, from a fundraising campaign, we need to achieve an average gift. That's a KPI. That's basically a piece of data we want to pay attention to of $50. So that's a benchmark. That's something that we're trying to achieve. It's a number that we're trying to achieve from 200 donors. So these are just kind of an easy way, a visual way to understand how all these things relate. Because this is the thing that you care about. This is the thing that your development director, your executive director, your board of directors are going to potentially even hand you and say, here's the goal. This is how you get there. This is how you get there. And we want to talk about actionable ways that can get folded in your decision making, but we got to start with that foundation first. So why do benchmarks matter? Well, there's a few different elements here. First, they're going to give you and key stakeholders a focus in a sea of data. So instead of just kind of going with, what's in a gut judgment, you actually have a number that you can point to. And it tells you what success is going to look like when you lack that historical data. So even if you don't necessarily have everything at your disposal, if you know the map that you're supposed to follow, and KPIs and benchmarks help map that out for you, then you know what direction to focus your efforts on, because there's only so many hours in the day. You're going to be waking up, maybe you're helping the kids get to school, you got to eat, and then what are you doing with those other hours? And so this is to help you use that time efficiently. We also want you to be able to strategic plan with realistic goals and fewer surprises. In a 2012 study, the Harvard Business Review actually published something called The Evolution of Decision Making, how leading organizations are adopting a data-driven culture. And more than half the respondents agreed or at least indifferent about the statement, my manager relies more on judgment and gut feel than data to make decisions. How often does that sound familiar in our own organizations? So what we need to do is be able to provide these KPIs and benchmarks to our team in order to actually say, look, we need to make decisions that are based off of data. We don't want to discount institutional knowledge and a person's intuition, but we want that to be guided by data, because that same report, more than 3/4 of respondents said using analytics increased productivity, reduced costs, and allowed for faster decision making, with 70% of respondents saying the outcome was improved financial performance for their organization. And so nonprofits need to take inspiration from that. I want to thank Neon One Consultants, the Colo Group, for actually helping spotlight that. They recently helped in articulating some of our benchmarks in a recent webinar that we did too. At this one, we want to actually drill in even deeper. So what exactly are the KPIs? Okay, we keep talking about them, but what are they? What's the actual definitions? Now, before I dive into this in detail, I do want to point out that there is a handy download from the Fundraising Effectiveness Project that has these. So there's going to be a few different ways that you can actually reference back to this. That's one of them that we want to provide you from the get-go. So when we're talking about these types of metrics, a good starting point is the average, let's go back, average annual giving per donor. And so what that actually means is the total dollars received in 1 year divided by the total number of donors who gave that year. So that's a pretty important benchmark to start with. And again, those definitions are something that you can not only find within Neon CRM, but also in the download that we gave you. So you don't have to worry about furiously writing these down. We have you covered. So the next one that's important is average gift. So this is the total dollars received by the total number of gifts received. This is harking back to high school math, basically. Averages, statistics, that type of stuff. But it's an important one because understanding the average gift size means that if you are trying to cultivate a certain type of donor and maybe an ask amount, knowing the average is a good benchmark to be able to drill down against. Now, an important one is donor retention rate as well as donor attrition rate. These two do interact with each other pretty closely. So donor retention gets talked about a lot in our industry. And we're going to be focusing in on a bunch of different KPIs, but this is the one that you're going to hear probably the most about. Now, the simple definition of this one is the number of donors who gave last year, and again this year, divided by the total of number of donors from last year. So the simple way to think of this is they came back. The people that you got last year to donate, they're back again. And so that's a simple retention rate. That's an important one because it costs a fair amount of money to acquire a donor. Typically 7 times more than it is to retain somebody. So that's an important benchmark that we hear a lot about, but attrition rate's also important too, because this is the number of donors who gave last year, but not this year. It's like the opposite, divided by the total number of donors from last year. So pretty much, this is the inverse of your donor retention rate. So if you have a high retention rate, then you're going to have a low attrition rate. They mirror each other. That's the simple part there. Then we have our donor participation rate. So we're going to go through 14 of these, but these are pretty important to start with. So the donor participation rate is the total number of donors in a year divided by the number of donors in your database at the end of that year. And so a lot of times this is a metric that is dependent upon how you are managing your data. So let's count a database to be even in an Excel spreadsheet. If you keep all your donors in an Excel spreadsheet, you can count this as your donor participation rate. So basically, this is the number of people that you got to opt in to donating again. Now, I know that we're going to have some questions coming in. I'm going to be going through these definitions and then trying to fold in questions. We do have a dedicated Q&A at the end. We also do have a staff member on hand to answer things as well. So I'm definitely not ignoring your questions. If they're still outstanding by the end, we'll be taking them at the end of this presentation. So definitely on the lookout for that. So the next KPI to pay attention to is the donor reactivation rate. And that's the number of donors who gave this year and 2 years ago, but not last year, divided by the number of donors who gave 2 years ago, but not last year. So pretty much this is people that you got before, but you didn't. You got them this year. You got them 2 years ago, but you didn't get them last year. So they came back. They came back. It's kind of like somebody who, in the case of 2018, they gave in 2016, but they didn't give in 2017, but they gave in 2018. It's that simple. So really, at the end of the day, these are pretty simple concepts, but ones that are important to pay attention to. So reactivation rate's a pretty solid one. And then you got your recapture rate. And so your recapture rate is the number of previously lapsed donors who renewed this year divided by the total number of donors last year. So really, it's just people that you keep. A lot of these come down to bringing them back, and it's dependent upon time. A lot of this is time focused. So a lot of cases, this is going to be focused on calendar or fiscal year settings that you go by. So that's an important element for these is what is the time frame that you're actually looking at as well. So if you run on a fiscal year that is not a calendar year, please keep that in mind. Please keep that in mind. So the next one that we should be paying attention to is the donor reacquire rate. Now this is kind of a long one, so hang on. The number of recaptured donors, so that's related to the last item, who gave this year but not in the last 2 years, divided by the number of donors whose last gift was 3 or more years ago, but not in the last 2 years. So this is kind of a complicated one, but this is an important one because it's showing kind of overall trends. This is where, when we get into multi-year percentages to pay attention to, this is what you can start to point to for your team to say, we have a trend that we need to address. And if you have a low reacquire rate, then you might want to either start looking at least targeting specific types of donors that are on the high level to reacquire, or to just overall look at how you're doing your marketing. Because a lot of these will end up applying directly to how you're marketing to your constituents, either through email, through direct mail, through social media, all the different channels. It's also to keep those in mind when you're looking at these statistics. A simple one is donors in the database. So we were talking about, if you got an Excel spreadsheet, how many people are in that have given to you? Because you might have a list of just emails. Those are not donors. If it's just an email that somebody's never given, that's not a donor. We should count a donor as somebody who's actually given you money. So an important one for obvious reasons. Then donors this year. That's a fun one. That's a fun one because you can see if you're looking at a specific year or this year in particular, how many people have you gotten to give so far in 2018? We are literally halfway through the calendar year. So where are you? Where are you right now in terms of how many people have donated? And then also look at that next to the donors in the database overall. Do they match up? How close are they? A lot of these KPIs, it should be noted, should not live in a vacuum. A lot of them should not live in a vacuum, because if I'm looking at something like the average gift, that might be affected by something like a retention rate. If I am bringing back a lot of small donors but losing major donors, that's another important element. So another important one is estimated donor lifetime. How many years can we figure that these people are going to be giving to us? And this is calculated as 1 divided by the donor attrition rate. So basically, this relates, as I mentioned, back to another KPI. So this donor attrition rate, we're going to be dividing that and understanding how long somebody might be giving to us. Because if we have a low attrition rate, then that means that people are more likely to be coming back and people are more likely to continue to give. And then that means that we're going to keep them for longer. And we can potentially even start to use estimated lifetime as a benchmark of understanding potential income to come. Helps us really understand that. New donor acquisition rate is just the number of new donors this year divided by the total number of donors last year. Again, these terms can be found in the handout. So if you want to reference that, please download the handout. We also can set you up with a trial in Neon, and you can see this too. You'll see that very shortly. So the number of new donors this year divided by the total number of donors last year means, like, cool, we got a bunch of people, but are they new? Are they new? Because you always want to fill the well. The Fundraising Effectiveness Project has a lot of great data as it relates to things like retention rate and new donor acquisition rate. And so we're going to point you to the most recent up-to-date report for 2018, where you can see the benchmarks going on this year, because it's important to understand that. It's also important to understand the rate of growth in your donors. That's the net gains in the number of donors minus the losses in the number of donors from last year to this year, divided by the total number of donations last year. And so our rate of growth is going to show us how many people we're gaining. And that's an important metric because, again, you use that for overall health. I would rate that pretty high, but not as high, in my opinion, as the rate of growth in giving. Donors are individuals, but the giving is going to be this is a very similar one, but this is the actual value of the gift. The definition is the net of gains and losses in giving from last year to this year divided by the total value of gifts received last year. Whew. Okay, that's 14. I know that's a lot of definitions in math, right? Like, that's the scary part, because understanding these is pretty vital, but you got to start somewhere. And so we want to understand that once you're told these definitions, well, how can I actually leverage this in my planning? Like, Tim, that's all well and good that you gave me a bunch of definitions and I might, look at some numbers, but what do I actually do with that information? And so first we want to help you build some campaign models. And, I'm going to highly encourage that you go to afpfep.org. www, of course, but basically that's where a lot of this information is being held, including running yourself through your own fundraising fitness test. And so when we start to look at this information, it's important to understand that benchmarking your organization's performance can help shine a light on exceptional execution or highlight areas where you need to improve. And so you'll be able to compare your previous performance against different benchmarks. You want to be able to identify areas to focus on for improvement. So maybe your average gift over a course of a few years is falling. See, and notice that it's not just all in one, right? Like, the Fundraising Effectiveness Project really understands that it's got to be broken out by also donation levels as well. So you're going to be able to break out things like retention rates on small donors versus large donors. This is why these elements can't live in a vacuum. If you are very effective at retaining small donors, but your major donor retention is going down, that is a flag for the major gift officers, or if you're a single shop, at least the executive director, to perhaps get more involved. And so you want to align your organization around goals backed by these numbers that everyone agrees to upfront. So there's different tools. FEP is one of them. Neon also has a direct sync with a platform called Fundraising Report Card that also helps visualize these types of things. So putting the tools in your hands is very important, because then when you're having these discussions as you gear up for end of the year, for instance, to be able to say, what are we going to do? Because you need to know what to measure throughout the campaign to stay on top of performance and adjust. If you just keep saying, well, we're going to send out what we planned in January, and you're 6 months in and you're falling behind where you thought you would be, it might be time to, instead of just hit send, take a look at that copy, take a look at who you're targeting, take a look at other elements that these KPIs are shining on us. All right. So the reports and the dashboards, what I want to do is actually show a little bit of Neon CRM, because we need to also visualize this type of stuff and keep it top of mind every day, because what we realized is that you can't just look at a spreadsheet. You got to be able to understand what's happening when this is occurring. And so in a system like ours, I'm going to actually draw this in. What you want to be able to do, and this is an example of Neon in action if you haven't seen it, is when you log in, we've built something called the Mission Control Dashboard. And what I've done is optimized a few different widgets that we have to specifically zero in on KPIs. And so, adding these types of widgets is pretty easy, by the way. So little tiny product demo just to kind of zero in. But it's as simple as kind of filtering by fundraising or being able to type in KPIs. Now, we have both fundraising or brand new membership KPIs. Same idea. If you're a membership association, we have some specific metrics to pay attention to. Today, we're talking about fundraising, though. And so in this system, the KPIs, not only are the definitions in there, but we can see live how we're doing. with a lot of this stuff. And visualizing this is pretty important. Now, it might be that your organization also decides to focus in on instead of 14 of these, maybe 10. And so you can actually turn things off. You can rename them. You can resize them. You can filter by different calendar or fiscal years to drill down into this information. And that's important because you want to personalize it on not only an administrative level, but on a case-by-case basis. So everybody can have their own KPI dashboard. For me, I love seeing everything. When I actually sent this out for my nonprofit Reading with Pictures, I did an end-of-the-year appeal, and it was really fun to see my attrition rate go down, my donor retention rate go up, and my average gift go up. And to see that live over the course of a campaign that you're running, even if it's just a few days like I did at the end of the year, that was fun. That was fun. But there's also times that you want to drill down. A lot of the stuff that we heard when we first rolled out the KPI dashboard is to also have a little bit more easy visualization around comparing times. So month to date and year to date comparisons are something that's also there as a little widget. And the general rule in Neon is that if it's blue, it's clickable. So in this case, donation amounts month to date, I can click and have a report. And I can quickly export this information, print this information, start to configure this if I need to do a little bit of editing or drill down to a specific record. So in this case, these are people that have donated some amount month to date. So even looking at the dates, hey, I got my June donors. And so that's a simple one. You can also do one based off of the year as well. When I was working at my last job, it was a Catholic school, and we would be kind of obsessive about what we got for that point of the year. The term that I always love using is LIBUNT, last year, but unfortunately not this year. That's kind of lapsed donors in this case. So again, being able to click into and act on these types of things is important, but some people also are very visual learners. So being able to drill down and say, look, I really, really, really want to look at my attrition rate for the last 10 years. Oh boy, what happened here? So that type of stuff is going to be pretty interesting to see on the fly. And again, it's the definitions are right here. The numbers, the actual formulas are built right into the platform. And some databases out there are definitely doing this, but not to the extent that I've seen what Neon does when it comes to putting all 14 of these metrics into it. In fact, our CEO was a big driver of making these KPIs actually something that even the Fundraising Effectiveness Project articulates. So this is something that Neon's been taking the lead on, and that's why we put a lot of emphasis on this. Again, it's still data, but it's important data that we want you to pay attention to. So this is just a little product demo that relates to this, because being able to visualize this information is, of course, vitally important. So let's pop on back over to how we can put this into your everyday processes. That's important. So first, we want to become a data-driven organization. I think that's something that we should all aspire to as a nonprofit. This is something that we found is actually pretty important when it comes to developing organizational culture. Our friend Mike Buckley at the Colo Group, he wrote a blog for us that's coming out soon, and in that he's going to be talking about how to make a data-driven culture. And one of the things that he spotlighted is that in early 2018, the Society for Human Resource Management released an article called "The Understanding and Development of Organizational Culture." And while that looked at overall culture, there's many advantages that were highlighted that relate to establishing a data-driven culture at your own nonprofit. A strong culture can bring benefits such as enhanced trust and cooperation, fewer disagreements, and more efficient decision-making. I think that we can all agree that those are things that would help us. And so, for instance, when you're becoming data-driven, start to schedule actual performance reviews. So do this at least once a quarter. So, we just hit the beginning of, we're heading into the last month of quarter two. So maybe once we hit July, we do something that takes a quick look at how we did in quarter two of the year. And what would we see as an impact if we're not addressing things? How much can we actually improve until the end of our campaign? So if you're doing an annual campaign, this is going to be in kind of that bucket of 365 days of the year. If you're doing more of a larger form campaign that's multi-year, you should still be breaking these things down and viewing them both on a calendar year basis as well as an overall campaign basis. And then you need to be able to think a little, what's happening if something's underperforming? What maybe our retention rate is going down. Why do we think this is happening? Do not be afraid to ask these questions. Being data driven in a culture is also not punishing people for asking uncomfortable questions about performance. So the reason that can help is if you have trust, if you have cooperation, if you basically come together and say, you know what? We're not doing as well as we thought we did. What can we do? What can we do different right now? And then do it. And then brainstorm those changes. Based off of the hypotheses, implement the plan to address. Maybe you have done historically a very expensive direct mail campaign, and this year the numbers aren't actually coming in. Is there a subset of donors that did succeed? Did you use different copy or messaging? Or a different font? I mean, these are little things that donors are going to be paying attention to. And donors don't live in a vacuum. They're getting hit with different media, different messages, different types of things. And so if you ultimately realize that your donors are not your donors and that we need to speak to them on their own terms, then we'd be able to act on that. So speaking of actions, what can we do? So first and foremost, one of the things that we can take is, before you do anything, what goals and data do you care most about? I gave you 14 KPIs to think about today. Do you care about all of those? I have personal opinions on the main ones to pay attention to. I think donor retention rate, average gift, and growth in giving are at least the top three in my book. Number of donors in the database is definitely important. Number of donations in the database is obviously important, but being able to understand trends, being able to understand if we're doing something that's affecting our stewardship and in turn affecting our retention and our acquisition, that's where my mind goes. Because ultimately we need to be a donor-centered culture as well. So how do you translate the data and the goals first? So you got to understand what you're working with to start with. Then you got to research your benchmarks. How do other organizations perform? Two great resources to start with. First, start your search at, like I said, afpfep.org. And so that's a good starting point in order to really kind of understand where the industry as a whole is. Also, another really cool thing that I've seen is our friends at Fundraising Report Card have their own live benchmark program. So they're able to actually drill into even specific industries, as an example. So, collecting data, it's just from their clients. FEP is a lot broader than that, which is the important part about FEP, is that it's definitely more reflective of the industry as a whole. But there's a lot of other benchmarking research that's been out there. Also, the M&R benchmarks report just came out, and that's, while not as direct as FEP, that's another cool one to check out. So between those three, you'll be able to drill down specifically to what your organization should be aiming at. Ultimately, though, researching benchmarks and seeing how other organizations perform, such as overall retention rate in the industry, which is kind of so far for this year, by the way, that's important, but it's not as important as making it specific to what you do. Benchmarks are good. Benchmarks are good to be able to point to and say, this is where we should be thinking about in terms of our goals. If the industry benchmark historically has been under 50% and your organization's retention rate when it comes to retention at under 50%. Maybe you're a little higher, maybe you're in the 50s, and your executive director comes in and says, we need our retention rate to be 90%. You can say, nobody really gets that. That's a little unrealistic. Why don't we take a look at something that aligns with where we've been and try to increase that? We would love to be at 100% retention, but the reality is that it's going to be very tough to achieve that. So what can we do to make a plan and apply our own goals into the results that you want to see? And when you see results, what are you going to do? Because a lot of times we focus in on the negative when it comes to these types of things. Retention rate is going down, that type of stuff. But the reality is that there's a lot to celebrate. There is a lot to celebrate. Giving's going up. People are deemed, more generous than previous generations. We're seeing a massive transition of wealth occurring in the next few years between boomers going to the next generation. And so there's a lot of exciting stuff that's happening, especially when it comes to major gift too. Major gift numbers are actually going up in many cases. And so we want to celebrate that. And so when it happens at your organization, it's not just that you should focus in on the negative and go, oh gosh, what are we going to do? Celebrate. Talk about, and part of being a data-driven culture is celebrating good data too. Celebrating that. So what are you going to do? No matter what, have a plan. So I'm going to pause here for any questions. I know that our team has been taking a look at that. All right. Okay. Actually, it looks like our team's done a great job at answering the question. So if there's any other questions, happy to answer that, though, for what we talked about today. All right. Well, we keep it tight and focused here at Neon. Want to give you a little bonus besides the action items and the handouts that we encourage you to download is if you go to FEP's website, go to the /report/download, or at least /reports, and you'll be able to see this. And you're going to be able to see 2018's Q1 report. It is out, and it is something to pay attention to when we start talking about this. Now, again, this is the first quarter. It also might be useful to look at previous reports, too, to see how 27 panned out. That was some really fascinating data. FEP does a lot of great work. We're really proud partners of that. And definitely check out. We did just a link to that resource there. But this is a cool report, and it helps us stay on our toes as we do our own fundraising and as we build out our own product. And so being able to supply something that helps organizations like yours is something that we're very proud to have built into Neon CRM when we have something like this right into the platform. So definitely, if you're looking for a system to help centralize and make this more efficient for you, check us out, reach on out. We'll be reaching out too. And we wanted to thank you for spending the time today learning how to be a data-driven nonprofit. And thank you very much for stopping by. And again, this has been recorded. We'll be putting that all together. You all have a wonderful day.